Republican senator got away with stealing $1 billion from the government. And he showed up at the sentencing for Littlejohn. Florida Republican Senator Rick Scott's previous gig was governor of Florida. He became a politician because there was no place else for him to go after he destroyed his reputation as the CEO of Columbia HCA, a chain of hospitals that he started. Under his leadership, Columbia HCA was forced to pay a $1.7 billion fine to the Justice Department for ripping off Medicare and Medicaid. According to the Justice Department, Senator Rick Scott of Florida oversaw at the time the single largest health care fraud in American history. Scott overbilled and overcharged Medicare and Medicaid for services he never provided. His company, not he, had to pay a criminal fine, and he never spent a single day behind bars. Instead, he got to keep his fortune and ran for governor of Florida, got elected. Now he's running for re-election as the Republican senator from Florida. Rick Scott is a corporate criminal. In another country or at another time in American history, this prick would be behind bars. Instead, he showed up at the sentencing hearing for Charles Littlejohn, that 38-year-old IRS contractor who leaked thousands of tax returns showing that rich people like Senator Rick Scott pay little to no taxes. Among the tax returns Littlejohn leaked was that of Senator Rick Scott's, who complained that the Justice Department and the judge were being way too lenient with Littlejohn, only sending him to prison for 5 years. Senator Rick Scott, who stole more than $1 billion from Medicare and Medicaid, told the judge that he and his family had to live with the fear that their confidential tax returns were now part of the public record. Poor baby. Scott called Littlejohn's leak, and I quote, the greatest heist in IRS history. Said the man responsible for the greatest heist in Medicare and Medicaid history. Littlejohn performed a public service, you shaved chode. Then Senator Scott, who stole at least $1 billion from Medicare and Medicaid, called the 5-year prison sentence, quote, the plea deal of the century, unquote. The plea deal of the century. You know, I read this story in more than 4 separate, well-respected news sites, and not one reporter mentioned the bitter irony that Rick Scott stole close to $1 billion from our government and never saw one day behind bars. And yet the IRS contractor, who one could argue is up there with Daniel Ellsberg for exposing the gross inequality in our system, he's going to prison. How does Rick Scott look at himself in the mirror? I mean it. How does this guy look at himself in the mirror? Look at him. His face looks like a testicle in the final throes of gangrene. Rick Scott and Jeff Bezos should form a folk singing group called My Grandfather's Saggy Balls. My Grandfather's Saggy Balls with Rudy Giuliani on the hurdy-gurdy.
It's time right now for the David Feldman Show. So get